All right, welcome to the week 4 challenge here. And as you can see, this week's challenge is game related. Your challenge here is to make an electronic dice. And I have a few tips here and things to talk about real quick to maybe help you along a little bit. So let's see what we can learn about this challenge. All right, so one of the things that you're going to need to do is to be able to generate a random number. You've already worked with the code for that, the random function. And to generate that random number, you're going to use a button. You've also done this before in a prior build. So you can work with some of that code to take a look at how that works. But here's a button, for example, that you're going to be using with this particular project. And the idea here is that when you push that button, it's essentially going to roll the dice and give you a number. And the number, of course, is going to need to be between 1 and 6 is what it needs to return, in which case then we're going to light up some lights to make that number, whatever number happens to come up. So here you can see a possible layout on the board of how this might look. And you'll notice that there's more than 6 lights on here. And that's because you're going to need a configuration that's going to handle all of the possible combinations. You'll notice that I'm using both sides of the breadboard. And so you're going to have to play around with how you're going to power that and get that power back to the board. At the same time, you're going to have to run each of these lights back to a digital input with a wire so that you can control each light individually. And so here we go. Let's see what you can do with this. So in this case, you're simulating the rolling of a die, and that each time you push the button, you're going to get a different number. And so part of what you're going to do now, after you get this built, is actually conduct a little experiment to see how random this actually is. So once you get the whole thing functioning, one of the last things you'll do before you post all of your results is actually to go ahead and roll your dice 100 times and keep track of all of your data. Record that data into a spreadsheet and then post online a graph that will show the distribution of your random rolls of the dice. So of course you have to be able to represent all the different sides of the die. And so as you saw on the way I laid it out on the breadboard, we have actually 7 lights in this array rather than just 6 in order to create number 3 and number 5 on the die. But beyond that, you're going to have to then figure out how these lights will all light up. And that means you're going to have to actually create, probably the easiest way to do this is create your own functions. And so on the next slide, I'll show you real quick what that might look like. So at this point, you've used these required functions. You need to remember that all Arduino programs are going to require a setup and a loop function. And those are required in all of them. And when you put the function in there, when you put it in, it's going to be void and then setup, void and then loop. And that's how you're actually going to set those functions up. So you've used these functions here. You're going to be doing some user-defined functions. And so it's a little bit different. In this case, you're going to be writing a program, a little clip of code that's going to do one thing, and it's going to do that one thing very well, and it can do it over and over. And so every time you need to do that one thing, you're going to call that function. Now you can hear my family in the background and the TV playing, so this is kind of a family affair here. But you'll notice this is how you will actually set up your functions. The first thing you have to do is define a function. And so we're going to initialize that function here with using int. Now the function name, it can be whatever you want to call it. And right now I'm just using this generic my function. You'll see that all over the internet. My function, and then I have the parentheses. Things are case sensitive, so if you use a capital letter in your function name, you'll need to use the capital letter when you call that function. So here you can see my function, and here is the call. And so here's how this works. You initialize the function, that's defining the function, and give it a name. And that's going to happen outside of all other functions. You can do that up here in the setup. Is a good place to do that. When you actually write your function, you're going to do the same thing you did when you use these predefined functions. You're going to put void and then the function name in the parentheses. Open brackets, and then a block of code. This block of code can be 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 100 lines. It's whatever you need it to do. It knows that it's at the end of that function when you put that closing curly brace. You've got to have an opening and a closing curly brace on every function you use. And then the function call looks like this. And in this case, it's going to be an if statement. So I'm saying here I have some variable called called x. And I'm saying that if x equals 2, then you're going to do this function. I want to call this function. And the one thing I see missing on this is it needs to have the parentheses after that. So I'll just simply say my function and the parentheses. And what's going to happen there is it's going to go do whatever is in this code block right here. Now this can be anywhere inside the program, preferably not embedded inside another function. But as I have this function right here called my function, I'm going to call that function my function, and it's going to go do whatever's in that code block. So in the case of your dice, you might have a function for, let's say, 1. You may then have another function that is for, we'll call it 2, etc., all the way up to 6. And that's how you might actually call those out. So finally, to make this work, you may have something like this. You have your dice, and I'm going to go ahead and put 7 dots there, and I'm going to number them. And I'll go ahead and you can number them any way you want, but I'm going to number this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if you remember that this is going to be a digital, and digital is either on or off, high or low. And so if I need to represent the number 1, which number do I need to actually have light up to represent the number 1? Well, on a dice, it's going to be this number here alone. So I might actually have, for example, something where I'm going to say, if 1, I'm just going to say number 1 is going to be represented this way, with 4 is going to be high. Okay? If I wanted to represent the number 3, 3 is going to be represented with these 3 right here. Well, I suppose you could represent it the other direction as well, but I'm going to represent it here with 3, 4, and 5. So I'm going to say in this case that if I want, and this is the number 1 here, if I want to represent the number 3, I'm going to go ahead and use 3, 4, and 5 are going to be high. I'll use a shorthand here. And the rest of that, I'm going to have 1, 2, 6, and 7 are going to be low. All right? So just to kind of show you how I might represent that. And again, going back to this, actually I only showed you part of that. I said 4 is high for number 1. That means that low, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7 are all going to be low. Again, just using some shorthand here. You're going to have to write this into the pin mode, and when you light these up, digital write to pin numbers, and then you're going to have to set these up as to which pin numbers are high or low based on what number you're actually trying to, actually be right here, what number you're trying to represent. Number 1, number 2, number 3, all right, number 3, number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 would be those 3, with 4 being low. So with that, you're off to this challenge, and make sure you document this all throughout the week. Remember that you need to document things that don't work just as much as you need to document the things that do work. You learn just as much when things don't function correctly and you debug them. In fact, you probably learn more when things don't work at first and you debug them. And make sure you document along the way and post all of that in this week's blog.